Our story today begins in London on the last day of 1851 with the birth of one Frederick Courtney Sellos Jr. Do you know who he is? No? Well, neither did I. He became known as a famous explorer, officer, professional hunter, and rather incongruously, a conservationist. So, you wouldn't necessarily put those two things together, but there you go. And he was great friends with such distinguished luminaries as Theodore Roosevelt and Cecil Rhodes. But what does he have to do with us, and why am I talking about him? Well, he served as the real-life inspiration for H Rider Haggard's most famous character from that wonderful novel, King Solomon's Mines, among others. Hello and welcome to Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and to another episode of Beyond the Book. And today we are looking at just one of the stories behind this fantastic book, which is the fourth pick for our group read in August of Adventures, an event being hosted by Sean D. Stanfast, Mark Richardson from Richardson Reads, and myself. So back to Sellos. He was born into an aristocratic family, a very wealthy family, one of 5 children. His father was also Frederick, and his mother was called Anne. Frederick was very well to do, as he was chairman of the London Stock Exchange, and his mother Anne was a published poet. From early childhood, young Frederick was obsessed with stories of adventure and daring do, as well as showing an early appetite for natural history as he started to build up collections of butterflies and bird eggs from just the age of 10. Aged 15, Frederick was involved in his first brush with danger and a horrific accident that took place on a lake in Regent's Park. It's known as the Regent's Park skating disaster, where the ice that covered the park cracked and broke under the weight of some 200 skaters, leaving 40 of that number dead, either due to drowning or freezing to death in the cold waters. Frederick was able to escape by crawling over broken slabs of ice in order to get to shore in safety. No doubt his coolness demonstrated here would serve him well in his future career. Instead of going on to study medicine, as his parents wished, he went to study natural history, and this brought him into contact with Africa for the first time, aged 19. Now, obviously, his definition of studying natural history is rather different from ours, as he spent the next 18 years travelling all over southern Africa, shooting vast amounts of wildlife. Done so, of course, under the auspices of sport and collecting specimens for various museums. It was during his time in Africa that he met Cecil Rhodes and Roosevelt, who was there, of course, hunting. After returning to England in 1892, he was given the Royal Geographical Society's Founders Medal in recognition of his extensive exploration of Africa. He moved back to Africa in 1893, where he took part in the First Matabele War, and upon being wounded, he returned to England, where he got married, and once again in 1896, he can't stay away, can he? He moves back to Africa and moves to Matabele Land with his new wife. In case you're wondering, Matabele Land is presently in western Zimbabwe. Not long after arriving there and setting up a house, the Second Matabele War broke out, and he found himself in action yet again, this time fighting alongside Robert Baden-Powell, who, of course, you will know is the man who later went on to establish the Boy Scouts and Scouts movement, of course, which became very global and popular. At the age of 64, Sellos found himself at war yet again with the outbreak of World War I in 1914. The war in Africa, the First World War in Africa, is often overlooked and jokingly has been called the Ice Cream War. This saw British colonial forces and their allies pitted against German colonial forces and their allies in a rather brutal conflict, which actually earned Frederick the Distinguished Service Order, which is a medal in the British Army for gallantry, which he received in 1916. However, and sadly, a year later, whilst fighting on the banks of a river in German southwest Africa, he was shot in the head by a German sniper and killed instantly. Now, as sad as it is, I can't let it pass without comment at saying perhaps there's some irony there that he ended up being killed basically by a hunter. So he ended up being shot like an animal in the bush. Upon getting the news, American President Theodore Roosevelt, a close friend, as I've already mentioned, wrote, "He led a singularly adventurous and fascinating life, With just the right alternations between the wilderness and civilization, he helped spread the borders of his people's land. He added much to the sum of human knowledge and interest. He closed his life exactly as such a life ought to be closed, by dying in battle for his country, while rendering her valiant and effective service. Who could wish for a better life or a better death, or desire to leave a more honourable heritage to his family and his nation? One thinks that's very Rooseveltian, isn't it? Well, Theodore Rooseveltian anyway. He was buried beneath the tree, pretty much where he fell, in land which is now known as the Sellers Game Reserve. And in a really strange twist to this story, exactly a year to the day, so Sellers was killed on the 4th of January 1917, and on the 4th of January 1918, his son, Captain Frederick Hartley Bruce, MC, was also killed in action against the Germans, this time in Belgium. I don't know what the odds are. Well, probably 1 in 365, I suppose, but yeah, it's pretty harsh, that. Anyway, maybe you've read some of H Rider Haggard's Quatermain books, maybe you haven't. The most famous one, as we've been talking about, is King Solomon's Mines. And if you have read them, you will certainly see how Sellers served as inspiration, in a big part, for this legendary character, this rather extraordinary gentleman. Alan Quatermain first appeared in this book, King Solomon's Mines. There are books that precede it, but they were published after it. So Haggard goes back to kind of give the backstory. He appears in over 20 of Haggard's works, including some of the Aisha series as well, which is related to the books She, for example. And he's been played on screen by numerous actors, including Richard Chamberlain, Sean Connery, Cedric Hardwicke, Patrick Swayze, and Stuart Granger. And probably I would say the Stuart Granger film is my personal favourite for King Solomon's Mines. But you can. The Patrick Swayze one isn't terrible, to be honest. It's not the best, but it's not terrible. The book itself is considered to be the genesis of the Lost World genre, with Haggard as its creator. And upon publication in 1885, billboards around London proclaimed it as the most amazing book ever written. Is it? Well, I don't know. And if you don't know, why not join us next week for the read-along in August of Adventures and find out if it is indeed the most amazing book ever written. It's in the public domain, so you don't have to buy it, at least. But I do appreciate, of course, many of you will have a lot on. On that note, I will leave you. Thank you so much for watching. Do take care of yourselves, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye. Better